Mocking him was simple, until the apex hunters backed away. The station hummed with the usual mix of alien chatter, metal footsteps, and the low vibration of energy cores. Humans were still a novelty here, walking awkwardly among species whose forms and abilities were as diverse as the stars themselves. Ethan Cross leaned against a railing in the crowded observation deck, arms crossed, a grin playing on his lips. Around him, dozens of alien eyes followed his every move. He didn't care. Humans had been mocked, underestimated, and dismissed in this part of the galaxy for centuries, and Ethan, for better or worse, liked to make the mockery a little more fun. "Look at them," he said, voice carrying easily over the hubbub. "All proud, all sharp claws and shiny armor, thinking they're untouchable, and yet they're scared of a human walking into their little arena." A few of his fellow humans chuckled nervously. They weren't sure if he was brave or insane. Around him, a group of tall, chitinous aliens known as the Apex Hunters turned their heads, their expressions unreadable. Their leader, a towering figure named Zirak, narrowed his eyes. The Apex Hunters had a reputation that stretched across multiple systems. They were merciless, strong, and feared by every species that had ever tried to cross them. Yet here was this human, daring to mock them openly. "You talk too much," one of the hunters said, its voice a deep rumble that vibrated the floor. "Your kind is weak. You do not belong here." Ethan shrugged, leaning further over the railing. "Maybe, but the weak sometimes have the best laughs." Some of the aliens around them murmured, exchanging glances. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but this was different. There was confidence here, something raw and sharp. And yet, Ethan's confidence bordered on foolishness. Zirak stepped closer, each movement deliberate, his eyes glinting with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "You mock us in public, you draw attention to yourself. You know this is dangerous." Ethan tilted his head, a sly smile forming. "Dangerous, maybe. Fun, definitely. Look, I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just pointing out what everyone's thinking, that's all." The Apex Hunters remained silent, their immense forms looming like shadows in the bright lights of the station. Ethan could feel the tension growing, but he refused to back down. He had been trained in human ways of thinking and improvisation. He knew that in situations like this, fear could be as powerful as strength, and he could play that game better than anyone. Around them, the crowd of aliens and humans grew silent. They could sense the moment was turning. This wasn't just another insult thrown carelessly. Something about Ethan's stance, the calm in his voice, hinted at a strange kind of power. Zirak stepped forward, the floor vibrating slightly beneath his massive weight. "You are bold, human, bold to the point of ignorance. Perhaps you do not know what you are inviting." Ethan's grin widened. "I know exactly what I'm inviting. A little attention, a little challenge, and maybe a story to tell when the stars laugh at us humans again." The tension was palpable. The Apex Hunters had never been mocked so openly, certainly not by a human. Usually their presence alone was enough to silence an entire room, yet Ethan didn't flinch. Some of the humans around him shivered, but he didn't care. He thrived in moments like this, when the impossible suddenly felt possible. Zirak's eyes narrowed further, studying Ethan like a predator studying prey. But instead of anger, there was a glimmer of intrigue. "Perhaps you are more than you appear, human. There is a trial taking place on the planet Varaxis II. Many have failed it. Perhaps you would wish to attempt it." The crowd around them shifted, whispers spreading. Varaxis II was infamous. Hostile terrain, unpredictable weather, predators larger than most spacecrafts, and traps set by no one knew whom. Survival there was considered nearly impossible. Ethan's eyes sparkled with mischief. "A trial. Sounds like a vacation compared to this station." He laughed, loud and confident. "But tell me, do I just walk in and I don't know survive? Or is there some kind of guideline?" Zirak's tone was unyielding. "No guideline except your wit, your reflexes, and your will to live. Most who try perish within the first cycle. If you fail, it will be remembered not for bravery but for foolishness. If you succeed, perhaps you will earn the respect of the Apex Hunters." Ethan's grin didn't fade. If anything, it grew sharper. "Respect from you guys. Now that's the kind of challenge I like." The moment hung in the air. The crowd was quiet, watching the improbable scene unfold. No human had ever faced Varaxis II and returned. And yet here was Ethan, daring to step forward, ready to turn mockery into legend. As preparations began for the journey, Ethan noticed subtle signs among the Apex Hunters. They didn't move as one might expect from a group ready to annihilate a human. They observed him carefully, almost as if they were measuring something beyond strength. Intelligence, perhaps. Or instinct. Whatever it was, Ethan knew it could work in his favor. Humans had always adapted, survived, and thrived against impossible odds. This was no different. The journey to Veraxis II was tense. Ethan was accompanied by a small group of humans who, while nervous, shared his determination to see what they were capable of. They watched in awe as Ethan studied the alien equipment, learning quickly, improvising solutions, and even cracking jokes that made his companions laugh despite the looming danger. Once the small transport ship entered the atmosphere of Veraxis II, the true challenge became clear. The planet was a violent swirl of red storms and jagged mountains. The surface was dotted with deep canyons, glowing rivers of molten minerals, and vegetation that seemed almost alive, moving subtly as if observing the newcomers. Ethan's heart raced, not with fear but with excitement. This was exactly the kind of chaos humans thrived in. The transport landed in a clearing that smelled of ozone and smoke. The apex hunters observed from a distance, towering silhouettes in the storm. They would not interfere, only watch. Ethan stepped out, feeling the sting of the acidic wind on his skin, the heat radiating from the molten streams beneath. He looked back at his companions, who hesitated. "Relax," Ethan said, a confident grin plastered on his face. "It's not the monsters, not the storms, not even the alien hunters that kill you. It's the people who panic and stop thinking, and we don't panic." He led the group into the treacherous terrain, navigating narrow paths that seemed impossible, leaping over crevices, ducking under swinging vines with thorns sharper than any blade he had ever seen. The humans followed, inspired by his fearless approach. Hours passed, and the planet tested them at every turn. Thunder cracked across the sky, and predatory creatures slithered in the shadows, watching, waiting. Ethan's sharp mind and quick thinking saved them more than once. He set traps from broken branches and rocks, used reflections to scare away predators, and found shelter in caves that were almost invisible to the naked eye. Throughout it all, the apex hunters watched silently, gradually shifting from skepticism to curiosity. Ethan's behavior was unlike anything they had seen. The human was not physically dominant, yet he commanded his surroundings with a presence that could not be ignored. By the time night fell on Veraxis II, Ethan and his group had survived several attacks and nearly impassable obstacles. They huddled together in a small cave, exhausted but unbroken. Ethan sat slightly apart, looking out at the glowing rivers below, his mind racing with strategies for the days ahead. "You make it look easy," one of the human companions whispered, awe in her voice. Ethan chuckled softly. "Easy? Nah, just fun, and the apex hunters. They're learning something too, something about us humans. Never underestimate the species that laughs at fear." Outside the cave, in the dark, the silhouettes of the apex hunters shifted. Zirak and his team had seen enough to know that this human, this small, brash, seemingly ordinary human, was not to be dismissed. There was something there, something raw and powerful that even the galaxy's fiercest hunters could not quantify. As the first night cycle of Veraxis II passed, Ethan felt a strange sense of pride. Not in proving himself to the apex hunters yet, but in the realization that humans could survive where others would fail. That their ingenuity, their creativity, their stubbornness, their humor in the face of fear, all of it made them a force that even the universe had to take notice of. He leaned back against the cold stone, smiling at the stars above. Mocking the apex hunters had been simple, fun even. But now, on the surface of this harsh, alien world, he understood that this was only the beginning. And in the distance, beneath the swirling red storm, the apex hunters stepped back slightly, their respect growing in ways they themselves could not yet name. Morning on Veraxis II came with a roar. The sky burned red as the twin suns climbed slowly over jagged mountains, casting strange shadows across the molten rivers and alien flora. Ethan Cross woke with a start, his senses alert even in sleep. Survival on this planet demanded constant attention. The smallest lapse could be fatal. He shook his companions awake gently. "Time to move," he said. "Don't get too comfortable. This place doesn't forgive laziness." They emerged from the cave into a chaotic landscape. Wind howled through jagged canyons, carrying abrasive particles that stung their skin. The air was thick with sulfur, and distant roars hinted at predators lurking in the shadows. Ethan studied the terrain carefully, mapping it in his mind as he led the group along a narrow ridge. "The apex hunters aren't here," one of the humans whispered nervously, "but it feels like we're being watched." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good, that means we're on the right path. If they weren't curious, we wouldn't be doing anything interesting." He moved with precision, scanning the terrain for hazards. Unlike the apex hunters, humans relied on observation and quick thinking rather than brute strength. It was a small advantage, but it could mean life or death. Hours passed with constant vigilance. The humans had to leap across rivers of molten rock, balance on unstable ledges, and evade enormous predators that seemed to sense their presence with terrifying accuracy. Ethan's leadership was precise. He taught them to watch for subtle signs in the environment, shifts in shadows, changes in wind, unusual vibrations. Every movement mattered. At one point, a predator resembling a massive armored lizard lunged from the shadows. Its scales reflected the sun like molten metal, and its claws could tear through steel. The group froze, unsure of what to do. Ethan's mind raced. He grabbed a length of metallic vine nearby and fashioned a quick trap, tying it to a rock that balanced precariously over a small cliff. "Follow my lead," he instructed calmly. He threw a stone to trigger the trap. The rock toppled, sending the vine swinging like a whip. The lizard misjudged the movement and stumbled backward, giving the humans enough time to retreat to safety. His companions stared, a mix of awe and disbelief on their faces. That actually worked," one of them muttered. Ethan shrugged. "Nothing fancy. Just observation, timing, and a bit of luck." But inside, he felt a surge of pride. This was exactly why humans survived against impossible odds. They adapted, they improvised, and they never gave up. As the group pressed onward, the terrain became even more hostile. Jagged cliffs rose like teeth from the ground, and rivers of molten rock crisscrossed the landscape. Strange, glowing plants emitted a low hum, vibrating in rhythm with the planet itself. Ethan realized quickly that these weren't just plants. They were sentient in some way, responding to vibrations and movement around them. "Stay calm," he whispered to the group. "These things can sense fear. If we act like prey, they'll attack. If we act confident, they might leave us alone." He led them through the glowing flora with careful precision. The plants shifted as they passed, but never attacked. The group began to understand Ethan's methods, learning to read the subtle cues of this alien world. Even the apex hunters, watching from a distance, would have to admit that the human was remarkable in his awareness and resourcefulness. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon. A river of molten lava ran through the middle, its heat intense enough to melt most metals. Ethan studied it carefully. "We can't go around, we have to cross, look for the stones that are stable and move slowly." He tested each step before committing, teaching the others to trust their instincts and their eyes. One wrong step and the heat would claim them instantly. As they crossed, a sudden tremor shook the canyon. Rocks tumbled down from above, forcing Ethan to dive out of the way. The humans followed, some slipping dangerously close to the molten river. Ethan grabbed a companion by the arm and pulled him to safety, his quick reflexes saving lives more than once. Finally, they reached the other side. The humans were exhausted but alive. They set up a small rest area using debris and rocks for shelter. Ethan examined the horizon. In the distance, the shadows of enormous predators could be seen stalking the terrain. This was only the beginning. "This planet is alive," Ethan said softly. "It's testing us, learning us. We have to be smarter than it if we want to survive." Night fell quickly on Varaxis II. The twin moons rose, casting a dim light over the alien landscape. Ethan kept watch, alert to every sound, every movement. His companions tried to sleep, but he knew the predators didn't rest, and neither did the planet itself. Hours passed, and suddenly a loud screech pierced the night. Ethan grabbed a makeshift torch and moved toward the sound. A predator had cornered one of the humans near the river. Its eyes glowed red, and its claws dug into the rocky ground. Ethan thought fast. Using a combination of fire and sound, he created a diversion. The creature lunged toward the torchlight, allowing the human to escape. Ethan moved quickly, striking with precision and forcing the predator back into the shadows. The human gasped, shaken but unharmed. "How did you?" Ethan smiled, panting slightly. "Think fast, move faster. The galaxy doesn't wait for anyone." The next morning, they continued their journey. Ethan knew that the apex hunters were still watching, evaluating every move he made. He also knew that the test was not just about survival, it was about showing them something unexpected. Humans weren't the weakest species in the galaxy. They weren't slow or fragile. They were clever, adaptable, and persistent. As they navigated a series of cliffs and canyons, Ethan noticed patterns in the environment. Rocks would shift in predictable ways, plants would react to vibrations, and the predators moved in coordinated hunting patterns. Using this knowledge, he set up traps and safe pathways. The humans followed, learning to move with precision and purpose. One evening, they reached a vast plateau overlooking a glowing river of molten minerals. The view was breathtaking, but it also revealed the magnitude of their challenge. The plateau stretched for miles, with dangers lurking at every edge. Ethan knew they had to cross it before nightfall. He studied the terrain carefully. "We're going to use the shadows," he said. "The predators rely on heat and movement. If we stick to the darker areas and move silently, we can make it across." The humans followed, moving like shadows themselves. Every step was calculated, every breath measured. Ethan led them skillfully, his confidence unwavering. Despite exhaustion, he maintained sharp focus, knowing that one mistake could be fatal. Halfway across, a massive creature emerged from the molten river. Its body shimmered like liquid metal and its claws could crush stone. The group froze, panic threatening to take hold. Ethan acted immediately. Using the environment to his advantage, he created a diversion with a rock slide, forcing the creature to retreat temporarily. "Keep moving," he shouted. "No stopping now." By the time they reached the other side, the humans were exhausted, burned, and bruised, but alive. They had survived a day on Varaxis II that would have killed almost any other species. Ethan looked back at the plateau, pride swelling in his chest. "We did it," he said quietly. "We survived, and the apex hunters, they're watching, they'll remember this." The night was calm, but Ethan knew the calm was temporary. Varaxis II was a living challenge, and it would continue testing them. But for the first time, his companions began to see the truth. Humans were not weak. They were adaptable, clever, and resilient. They could survive where others failed. As they settled into a small cave for the night, Ethan gazed at the stars. Mocking the apex hunters was simple, he thought. Surviving Varaxis II, that's the real story, and if we can do this, maybe the galaxy has underestimated us all along. Outside the cave, hidden in the shadows, the silhouettes of the apex hunters shifted. Zirak and his team had witnessed the humans' resourcefulness, their quick thinking, and their relentless determination. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they took a step back. Respect was forming where doubt had once existed. Ethan fell asleep that night with a rare feeling of calm. He knew the next day would bring new challenges, but he also knew that humanity had something the apex hunters could not ignore: adaptability, ingenuity, and the stubborn will to survive. And in the silent shadows beyond the glowing rivers, the apex hunters watched, intrigued and unsettled, realizing that the human before them was more than just a species to mock. He was a puzzle, a challenge, and perhaps the beginning of a new story in the galaxy. The sun rose slowly over Varaxis II, painting the jagged landscape in deep oranges and reds. Ethan Cross woke with a start, muscles sore from the previous day's trials. Every inch of his body ached, but he felt alive, sharper than ever. He glanced at his companions, who were still asleep, their faces etched with exhaustion and relief. They had survived the first full day on a planet designed to kill, and Ethan could already feel the pride swelling within him. Stepping outside the cave, he surveyed the terrain. The plateau stretched ahead like an unending challenge. Jagged cliffs, glowing rivers of molten minerals, and alien flora that shifted subtly with the wind created a maze of danger. But Ethan's eyes, trained and alert, could see paths and patterns invisible to others. Humans were small and seemingly fragile compared to the apex hunters or the massive predators of this world, but they had something else: adaptability. "Time to move," he whispered to his group, waking them. "We've got a long way ahead, and staying put isn't an option." As they navigated the rocky landscape, Ethan taught them to observe carefully. A slight tremor in the ground could indicate a predator's presence. A faint rustle in the glowing flora might signal a trap or ambush. Humans, unlike many species, could use creativity to turn danger into opportunity. Every rock, every shadow, every flicker of movement became a tool. By midday, they approached a wide chasm, too deep to jump across. On the far side, the terrain looked slightly more stable, but getting there seemed impossible. Ethan crouched at the edge, studying the rocks and cliffs. "We can do this," he murmured. "We just have to think differently." He noticed a series of large, jagged stones partially submerged in the molten river below. They weren't stable, but they could work if timed perfectly. Ethan turned to his companions. "We're going to jump in sequence. Trust the stones, trust your instincts, and move fast." No hesitation. The first human, a young woman named Mara, stepped cautiously. Ethan guided her, telling her when to jump, when to duck, and when to run. The stones wobbled and shifted beneath their weight, and molten steam hissed around them, but Mara made it across. One by one, the group followed, adrenaline pumping, fear clawing at their resolve, and yet they succeeded. Ethan was the last to cross. He jumped with precision, landing safely on the far side, and turned to watch the river behind him. A massive creature stirred in the molten currents, its glowing eyes scanning the landscape. If they had been slower, if they had hesitated, it would have been over. But Ethan and his team had adapted, turned danger into advantage, and survived. They pressed on, fatigue mounting but morale high. Ethan could see the apex hunters observing from a distance, their towering silhouettes almost blending into the rocky cliffs. Zirak, their leader, watched intently, his expression unreadable. The human had survived more than any of their predictions. Even now, the apex hunters were reconsidering their assumptions about humans. As night fell, they discovered a massive cave system that promised shelter from the harsh environment. Inside, glowing crystals illuminated the walls, casting strange, flickering shadows. Ethan and the others settled in, exhausted but vigilant. He kept watch near the entrance, scanning the shadows for movement, aware that predators could strike at any moment. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cave. Ethan tensed. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike any they had seen before. It was massive, with thick armored plates, 4 muscular limbs, and glowing eyes that reflected the crystal light. It moved with deliberate intent, circling them as if assessing their worth. Ethan quickly assessed the situation. "Don't panic," he whispered. "Move slowly, but stay ready. We're not prey here, not yet." He grabbed a handful of crystal fragments and threw them toward the opposite side of the cave, creating a sharp, clattering sound. The creature turned, and Ethan used the moment to lead his companions further into the cave, keeping low and quiet. The predator followed, but Ethan noticed its hesitation. It had never encountered humans like this, species that could think, plan, and adapt in ways that brute strength alone could not overcome. Hours passed as they navigated deeper into the cave. Ethan led them through narrow tunnels and over crystal bridges, all while avoiding the predator that stalked them silently. Every step was calculated, every move deliberate. His companions began to notice patterns in his thinking, learning to anticipate dangers and act accordingly. By dawn, they had emerged from the cave into a wide valley, a strange, almost serene place in contrast to the harsh terrain they had traversed. Glowing plants swayed in a gentle wind, and small, harmless creatures scuttled across the ground. Ethan allowed his group a brief moment to rest, though he remained vigilant. "This place, it feels almost peaceful," Myra said softly, watching the glow of the flora. Ethan nodded. "Even on this planet, calm is temporary, but use this time to rest. Tomorrow, the challenges continue." As they rested, Ethan thought about the apex hunters. He realized that their interest in him was more than mere curiosity. They were evaluating humans in a way no other species had. The human ability to think differently, to turn disadvantage into strength, was something the apex hunters had not accounted for. Their pride was vast, but Ethan suspected it could be challenged, perhaps even changed. That night, Ethan kept watch again. From a distance, he could see the shadows of massive predators, their forms outlined against the glowing valley. He stayed alert, noting their movements, their patterns, and even their strategies. The humans could learn from observation, and he intended to make the most of it. Suddenly, a sound like cracking stone echoed through the valley. Ethan's heart raced. A massive creature, easily 3 times the size of the humans, emerged from the shadows. Its claws dug into the ground, and its glowing eyes focused on them. It moved with terrifying precision, as if hunting not just for food, but for sport. Ethan assessed quickly. The creature was fast, strong, and relentless. There was no time for hesitation. He instructed his companions to scatter, using rocks and terrain to create barriers. He grabbed a fallen branch and ignited it using sparks from a rock, creating a makeshift torch. The creature hesitated at the light, giving Ethan and the group just enough time to maneuver behind a series of boulders. "Stay calm," he shouted. "We control the environment, we control the fight." They used their surroundings cleverly. Rocks were toppled to create barriers, crystal shards reflected light to distract the predator, and Ethan even used a narrow crevice to trap one of its limbs temporarily. It was exhausting work, but the humans adapted rapidly, thinking as a unit and trusting Ethan's guidance. Finally, the predator retreated, frustrated by their ingenuity and unwillingness to submit. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, breathing heavily but triumphant. "That's how humans survive," he said quietly. "Not with raw strength, but with brains, courage, and teamwork." The night passed without further incident, and by morning the humans had gained not just survival skills but confidence. Ethan noticed subtle changes among them: less fear, more focus, and a sense that they could face almost any challenge. Even the apex hunters, observing silently from the ridges above, were beginning to acknowledge the humans' resilience. As they continued their journey, the terrain became even more treacherous. They encountered rivers of molten rock, steep cliffs, and alien vegetation that seemed to react to their presence. Ethan led them carefully, setting traps, creating safe paths, and teaching his companions to read the land as an extension of themselves. By midday, they faced a massive predator, larger and more intelligent than any they had encountered before. It blocked their path across a narrow canyon. Ethan studied it carefully, noting its movements and reactions. He realized that brute force would not work. Instead, he used a combination of fire, sound, and timing to create confusion, leading the creature away long enough for the humans to cross safely. The apex hunters, still observing from a distance, took note. This human did not rely on physical strength alone. He used observation, adaptability, and strategy to overcome threats that would have destroyed almost any other species. Slowly, their skepticism turned into respect. As night fell on Varaxis II once more, Ethan and his group settled into a hidden cave, exhausted but alive. They had survived the day's trials, learned from each encounter, and grown stronger together. Ethan knew that the planet would continue testing them, but he also knew that humans had something the apex hunters could not ignore: ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to thrive where others failed. He sat near the entrance, gazing at the glowing valley below. "We've survived again," he whispered to himself. "The apex hunters will see that humans are more than they expected, and if we keep this up, the galaxy will have to rethink everything it knows about us." In the shadows beyond the glowing plants, the silhouettes of the apex hunters shifted. Zirak's eyes glinted with curiosity. The human had survived multiple encounters with predators, navigated the deadly terrain, and kept his group alive. Slowly, imperceptibly, the apex hunters stepped back, recognizing the resourcefulness and resilience that humans possessed. Ethan fell asleep that night with a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had led his companions through near-impossible challenges, and they had survived. More importantly, he had proven to himself and the galaxy that humans were clever, adaptable, and not to be underestimated. The journey was far from over, but each day on Varaxis II strengthened the truth. Humanity was a force that even the apex hunters would eventually have to respect. The next morning on Varaxis II dawned with a strange calm. The twin suns rose over jagged mountains, casting long shadows across molten rivers and jagged cliffs. Ethan Cross woke first, as always, scanning the terrain. The air was heavy with tension, almost as if the planet itself sensed the approaching challenge. Today, he knew, was no longer just about survival. The apex hunters had been watching, silently analyzing every move, every decision. And now it was time for a direct confrontation. Ethan gathered his companions and spoke quietly. "Today we don't just survive," he said, eyes glinting with determination. "Today we show them what humans can do: stay sharp, stay smart, and stay alive." The group moved cautiously across the valley. Every step was deliberate, every glance calculated. Ethan had learned the terrain well, noticing subtle shifts in shadows and the patterns of the glowing flora. The apex hunters were somewhere beyond the cliffs, their silhouettes barely visible, observing, waiting. Hours passed with tense anticipation. The group navigated narrow ridges, avoided rivers of molten minerals, and climbed jagged cliffs that would have broken lesser species. Ethan led with confidence, teaching his companions to anticipate danger, to read the land like an extension of their senses. Each challenge they overcame strengthened their resolve and their belief in themselves. Finally, they reached a plateau where the ground leveled out. Beyond it, Ethan could see the massive forms of the apex hunters. Xirax stood at the forefront, towering and imposing, his arms crossed. The other hunters formed a silent circle around him. This was the moment Ethan had been waiting for, the test of ingenuity, courage, and willpower against the galaxy's most feared species. Ethan stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I don't want to fight," he said, voice calm but carrying across the plateau. "But I won't run, not from you, not from anyone." Xirax's deep voice rumbled across the space between them. "You have survived much, human. Yet survival alone does not earn respect. Show us why you are more than a fleeting curiosity." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken challenge. This was not just about strength, it was about intelligence, strategy, and courage. He looked around the plateau, noting the natural features, jagged rocks, narrow ledges, and unstable surfaces. Inspiration struck. He had faced predators, deadly terrain, and environmental hazards before. Now he would use everything he had learned to confront the apex hunters in a way they did not expect. He signaled his companions to spread out. "We're going to use the environment," he said. "Watch me, follow my lead, and stay focused." The apex hunters observed silently, their posture rigid yet curious. They had never seen a human act with such precision, such calculation. Ethan moved swiftly, deliberately, using shadows and natural cover to maneuver across the plateau. He led his companions to high points, where the ground was stable enough to hold them but dangerous for the unaware. Suddenly, a massive predator emerged from the molten river below, its eyes glowing with menace. Ethan didn't panic. Instead, he used the creature's instincts against it. He threw rocks to trigger small avalanches and create obstacles, forcing the predator to retreat momentarily. His companions followed his example, learning to use movement, sound, and the environment to their advantage. The apex hunters watched, astonished. Humans had survived multiple encounters with far deadlier threats, and now they were facing not just the planet but the hunters themselves, and doing so with skill and intelligence. Ethan's mind raced as he noticed a weak point in the plateau, a narrow ledge above a steep drop, partially hidden by rocks. He moved quickly, positioning himself there while signaling his companions to follow. The hunters advanced, confident in their strength. But as they stepped onto the plateau, the ledge shifted slightly under their weight. Ethan had anticipated this. He activated a series of traps he had set earlier. Rocks and debris toppled down, creating barriers and forcing the apex hunters to reconsider each step. They were strong, fast, and powerful, yet they hesitated, unaccustomed to a foe who used strategy over brute force. Ethan moved gracefully, almost like a dancer, across the dangerous terrain. He guided his companions with hand signals and quiet commands, ensuring they remained coordinated and effective. Each move was calculated, each action intentional. The planet itself seemed to bend to his ingenuity, the challenges he had faced earlier giving him the tools he needed to confront the apex hunters directly. Xirax stepped forward, towering over Ethan, his voice deep and commanding. "You are clever, human. But cleverness alone will not save you. Show us your strength as well as your mind." Ethan smiled faintly. "Strength isn't always about muscle," he replied. "Sometimes it's about knowing what to do, when to do it, and how to use the world around you." With that, he set a final plan into motion. Using rocks, narrow ledges, and his companions as support, he led the apex hunters on a chase across the plateau. Each step was calculated, each movement designed to exploit the environment. Rocks fell, shadows shifted, and the hunters found themselves navigating hazards they had never expected. Ethan's group moved with agility and precision, staying just ahead of the apex hunters at every turn. The hunters, though immensely powerful, began to back away. They had underestimated the humans, assuming physical might alone would dominate. But here was a species that adapted, that used cunning and creativity to turn danger into advantage. Xirax's eyes narrowed, but even he could not deny the skill and intelligence on display. Ethan's heart pounded as he guided his companions through the final stretch of the plateau. They leaped over jagged rocks, avoided glowing rivers, and navigated narrow ledges with perfect timing. The apex hunters followed, but each step was hesitant, cautious, and calculated. They were powerful, yes, but they had never faced an opponent who could challenge their instincts so thoroughly. Finally, Ethan reached a high point overlooking the plateau. He turned to face the apex hunters, standing tall despite exhaustion. His companions gathered behind him, ready but respectful, their eyes shining with pride and awe. Zirek approached cautiously, his towering form casting a long shadow. "You have survived where most would perish," he said. "You have used your mind, your skill, and your courage to challenge not only the planet but us. The apex hunters rarely retreat, yet we do now. You have earned our respect, human." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Respect isn't just about strength," he replied. "It's about knowing your limits, adapting to challenges, and never giving up. Humans survive because we refuse to quit." The other hunters shifted, their postures relaxing slightly. They had watched with skepticism, but now they saw the truth. The humans had not just survived, they had thrived. They had turned apparent weakness into strength, uncertainty into advantage, and danger into opportunity. Ethan's companions cheered quietly, though they kept a respectful distance. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a human leading a group through challenges that would have destroyed almost any other species, and doing so with intelligence, courage, and strategy. The plateau seemed to settle into silence as the apex hunters stepped back, acknowledging the humans' skill. Zirek studied Ethan for a long moment, then nodded. "You have proven what your species can do. Perhaps the galaxy has underestimated humans for too long." Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. This was more than a personal victory. It was a statement to the galaxy. Humans were not weak, not fragile, and not to be dismissed. They had resourcefulness, ingenuity, and resilience that rivaled even the most feared species. As the sun dipped below the jagged mountains, casting long shadows across the plateau, Ethan and his companions gathered to rest. They were tired, battered, and exhausted, but alive and stronger than ever. The lessons of Varaxis II had been harsh, but invaluable. They had learned to trust one another, to adapt, and to see danger as an opportunity rather than a threat. Ethan sat at the edge of a cliff, looking out at the glowing rivers below. "We've done more than survive," he said softly to himself. "We've shown them something they didn't expect, and we're just getting started." The apex hunters remained in the distance, their silhouettes silent but observant. Respect had been earned, but curiosity remained. Humans had proven themselves in ways the galaxy had never anticipated, and the impact of their ingenuity and resilience would echo far beyond this planet. Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of pride. He had led his companions through trials that would have broken almost anyone else. They had survived predators, deadly terrain, and the challenges of the planet itself. And they had earned the respect of the apex hunters, a feat that no human before him had ever accomplished. As night fell over Varaxis II, Ethan looked at the stars above. The journey was far from over, but one truth had become clear. Humans were not just survivors. They were adaptable, clever, and resilient in ways that even the galaxy's most feared species could not ignore. The apex hunters had stepped back, acknowledging a new reality. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew this was only the beginning of humanity's rise among the stars. The morning sun rose slowly over Varaxis II, casting deep shadows across jagged cliffs and molten rivers. Ethan Cross stood at the edge of the plateau, his eyes scanning the horizon. The apex hunters had stepped back the previous day, acknowledging his skill, ingenuity, and leadership. Yet Ethan knew the galaxy was watching, not just the hunters. Every species that had dismissed humans as weak was now beginning to reconsider their assumptions. Today, he would solidify humanity's reputation, not with arrogance, but with action. He turned to his companions, who were still recovering from the challenges of the plateau. Each of them carried bruises, burns, and exhaustion, but there was determination in their eyes. They had survived Varaxis II because they had trusted each other and followed Ethan's lead. Now they were ready to take the final steps, not just for survival, but for recognition. "Stay alert," Ethan said quietly. "We're not done yet. This planet isn't finished testing us, and neither is the galaxy. Every move counts." The group moved cautiously across a narrow canyon, where molten rivers hissed and fumes burned their lungs. Ethan led them along jagged rocks that required careful balance, teaching them to use each step as leverage and to anticipate the terrain. Every movement was deliberate, every decision precise. The apex hunters observed from the ridges above, their towering silhouettes imposing yet silent, watching how humans faced challenges differently from any other species. Suddenly, a low rumble shook the ground. Ethan froze, signaling his companions to stop. In the distance, a massive predator emerged, larger and faster than anything they had encountered before. Its claws dug deep into the molten ground, and its glowing eyes fixed on the humans with a predatory intelligence. Ethan assessed the situation quickly. Running was not an option, and fighting head-on would be suicide. Instead, he turned to strategy. Using rocks, shadows, and narrow ledges, he created a path that forced the creature to take longer, more dangerous routes. He instructed his companions to move in precise coordination, using distractions and misdirection to confuse the predator. The creature lunged, but Ethan was ready. He used a combination of reflective crystal shards and sound to mislead it, forcing it into a trap he had spotted earlier, a narrow canyon where its size became a disadvantage. The predator roared, frustrated by the humans' clever tactics, but it could not reach them. Ethan's group had survived again, not because of brute force, but because of intelligence, coordination, and adaptability. As the humans pressed onward, the apex hunters observed closely. They had never seen a species turn near-impossible odds into victory through sheer wit and teamwork. Zirak, the towering leader, shifted his weight, his deep voice rumbling. This human and his kind, they are unlike anything we have encountered. They survive not by strength alone, but by mind, spirit, and unity. Ethan noticed the subtle changes in the hunters' posture. They were no longer just observing, they were learning. They were seeing the human capacity for adaptation and ingenuity in action. And this recognition was even more valuable than survival itself. Hours later, the group reached a vast chasm. A river of molten minerals flowed below, its heat radiating upwards. The only path forward was a narrow ledge along the cliff wall, slippery and unstable. Ethan studied it carefully. "This is our final stretch," he said. "Focus, trust your instincts, and follow my lead. Step wrong and we fall, step right and we finish what we started." One by one, the humans moved carefully along the ledge. Ethan stayed close, guiding them with quiet instructions, his eyes constantly scanning for hazards. The planet seemed to resist every step, yet the humans pressed on, each movement deliberate, each decision informed by observation and instinct. Halfway across, a sudden tremor shook the cliff. Rocks tumbled dangerously close, and one of Ethan's companions slipped. Instinctively, Ethan reached out, grabbing their hand and pulling them to safety. The group froze, hearts pounding, but Ethan remained calm. "Keep moving," he said. "We've come too far to stop now." With renewed focus, they navigated the final stretch, every muscle tense, every step measured. Finally, they reached a stable area on the far side of the chasm. Exhausted but alive, the humans took a moment to catch their breath. Ethan looked back at the treacherous path they had crossed. It was impossible to believe they had made it through, yet they had. The apex hunters approached, slowly and deliberately. Zirak stepped forward, his massive frame casting a long shadow. He studied Ethan for a long moment, then spoke. "You have led your companions through trials that would have destroyed almost any other species. You have used mind, courage, and adaptability to overcome challenges beyond measure. Humans are not the weak, fragile species we believed. You have proven your worth." Ethan nodded respectfully. "We survive because we adapt. We thrive because we refuse to give up. That's what makes humans strong." The other apex hunters shifted, acknowledging the truth in Zirak's words. They had underestimated humanity, assuming that physical might alone determined value. But here was a species that used intelligence, creativity, and determination to surpass expectations. Ethan's companions cheered quietly, their faces shining with pride. They had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had demonstrated the unique strength of humanity, resilience in the face of impossible odds. Every predator, every hazard, every near-fatal mistake had become a lesson, a stepping stone to recognition. As the group descended from the plateau, Ethan noticed the subtle respect in the apex hunters' movements. They did not follow closely, nor did they threaten. Instead, they observed, learning, acknowledging the humans' capabilities. Ethan realized that humanity's reputation had begun to shift. not just among the apex hunters, but potentially across the galaxy. Night fell over Varaxis II, and the humans gathered around a small, safe area near a glowing river. Ethan allowed them to rest fully for the first time in days. They were battered, burned, and exhausted, but alive and stronger than ever. "This is more than survival," Ethan said quietly, looking at his companions. "This is recognition. Every step we've taken, every decision we've made has shown the galaxy something new about humanity. We are not weak. We are not fragile. We are clever, adaptable, and resilient." Mara, still catching her breath, nodded. "You've taught us more than we ever imagined." "We can survive anything now," Ethan smiled faintly. "And this is only the beginning. Humans have always been underestimated, but when we adapt, when we innovate, when we refuse to give up, there's nothing we can't face." In the distance, the silhouettes of the apex hunters remained. Zirak stepped forward one last time. "You have earned our respect, human," he said. "Your kind is stronger than we imagined. The galaxy will take notice." Ethan acknowledged the statement with a small nod. Respect from the apex hunters was a monumental achievement, but he knew the journey did not end here. Humans would continue to face challenges across the stars, each one an opportunity to show their adaptability, intelligence, and courage. As dawn broke over the alien landscape, Ethan led his companions back toward their transport, reflecting on the journey. Varaxis II had tested them in every possible way: environmental hazards, predators, and the silent judgment of the apex hunters. And yet they had prevailed. Every challenge had strengthened them, every obstacle had taught them something new, and every success had earned them recognition. The humans boarded their transport ship, ready to return to the galactic station. Ethan looked out at the planet one last time. The molten rivers glowed beneath the rising sun, jagged cliffs stretched endlessly, and the apex hunters remained in the distance, silent but observing. Humans had survived where many would perish, and in doing so had proven their ingenuity, adaptability, and resilience. As the ship lifted off, Ethan allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries, but now that perspective was changing. The apex hunters had stepped back, acknowledging that humans were a force to be reckoned with. And this was only the beginning. The journey back to the station was quiet. Ethan's companions reflected on what they had accomplished, their respect for each other, and for humanity's unique strength growing with each passing moment. They had faced the impossible and they had survived, and in the process, they had shown the galaxy that humans were more than just another species. They were clever, adaptable, and resilient beyond measure. When they arrived at the station, the reactions were immediate. Humans and aliens alike had heard of the feat on Varaxis II, and whispers of astonishment spread quickly. Ethan and his companions were no longer just ordinary humans. They were symbols of ingenuity, courage, and the unyielding human spirit. Ethan stood quietly watching the crowd. He thought of the apex hunters, their towering forms and silent acknowledgement, and he realized something important. This victory was not just for himself or his companions, it was for all humans. The galaxy had seen what they could do, and perceptions were beginning to change. He smiled faintly. Humanity had survived impossible odds, faced predators and deadly terrain, and earned the respect of one of the galaxy's most feared species. They had done it not with brute strength, but with intelligence, adaptability, and determination. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. The stars outside the station glimmered, a silent reminder of the vastness of the universe and the endless opportunities it held. Humans had shown their strength, and the journey ahead promised new challenges, new discoveries, and new opportunities to prove themselves. Ethan Cross, standing among his companions, felt a quiet pride and anticipation. The galaxy was watching now, and humanity was ready. The apex hunters remained in memory, a symbol of respect and acknowledgement. But beyond them, across countless stars and countless worlds, humans had begun to leave their mark. Survival had been the first step. Recognition was the next. And as Ethan looked at the stars, he knew humanity would rise, adapt, and thrive in ways the galaxy had never expected. For the first time, humans were no longer underestimated.